Hello, friends. I thought it would be good to determine a common parlance or understanding for certain concepts so that if we're discussing them in the future, we have a simple reference point. This is why finding one's purpose was the subject of one of my first videos in this direction a couple of weeks ago. Today, we'll be looking at the subject of happiness, which is, when isolated from our purpose, a subjective, emotional state. But when taken together with our purpose, happiness can be derived from a long-term values-based state that comprises intentionality and determination. In the midst of writing this piece, I embarked on some long overdue travel to foreign locales. As I was out exploring this new city, near what some would call the origin of the West's primary R1b haplogroup, I met a local pensioner who spent most of his days as a poet. I told him that I was working on a piece about happiness, and I asked him if he'd be kind enough to share his perspective on happiness as a lifelong poet. He said simply, "Happiness is the overall feeling of contentment of the result of a life well lived." Clearly, this man had morphed beyond the class of people that Nietzsche had defined as camels, and thus spake Zarathustra. You inquire, my friends, why people fundamentally desire happiness. To answer this query, we must first comprehend the human condition. In our pursuit of meaning, we frequently pursue happiness as a means of finding fulfillment and contentment. But happiness is not a simple emotion or state of mind. It is a complex and multifaceted concept that is intricately intertwined with our worldview and sense of belonging. The pursuit of happiness is not merely about seeking pleasure or avoiding pain. Rather, it is a pursuit for a deeper sense of meaning and belonging in a fragmented and chaotic world. It is a means of accepting our own morality and finiteness and discovering meaning in the face of the unknown. Nonetheless, I must warn you that the pursuit of happiness can be spiritually perilous if it causes us to disregard the most fundamental concerns of existence. It is all too easy to become preoccupied with life's superficial pleasures and lose sight of the profound concerns that give our lives meaning and purpose. I encourage you to pursue happiness with caution and awareness. Do not become preoccupied with the pursuit of happiness to the exclusion of all other concerns. Embrace the unpredictability and mystique of life, and use your pursuit of happiness as a means of exploring the more elaborate questions of human existence and uncovering your unique place in the world. Now, let's examine happiness as the disciplines of science, philosophy, and psychology understand it today. When it comes to happiness, there are two philosophical camps. The one sees it as a value phrase similar to well-being or flourishing, while the second one sees it as a psychological term akin to depression or tranquility. It's like the difference between saying, "This burger is delicious," and saying, "I'm feeling happy." The former is a judgment about the burger's quality, while the latter is a description of our inner mood. Philosophers have spent a lot of time attempting to decipher what we mean when we say happiness. Is it a passing emotion or a more permanent state of being? And what actually causes us to be happy? Is it pleasure, life fulfillment, or a specific emotional state? Hedonists think that happiness is all about pleasure, whether that pleasure is physical, such as eating a good meal, or emotional, such as spending time with loved ones. The life satisfaction theory, on the other hand, concentrates on total life evaluation, such as relationships, accomplishments, and personal aspirations. The emotional state theory contends that happiness is a distinct emotional state characterized by positive affect and the absence of negative affect. While philosophers have been debating the nature of happiness for centuries, its importance in leading a happy life has been hotly debated in recent decades. Others are wary, saying that the constant pursuit of happiness can lead to disappointment and discontent. Happiness is of interest to more than just philosophers these days. Scientists have also entered the fray, employing empirical methods to investigate the psychological aspects of happiness. This has rekindled philosophers' interest in the psychological notion of happiness, as they attempt to reconcile their philosophical intuitions with scientific results. We must address the role of happiness in social and political decision-making as we continue to investigate its nature. Governments all around the world are increasingly employing happiness metrics to drive policy decisions. realizing that citizens' well-being is a critical component of a just and healthy society. So, what does it all mean for us? It means that happiness is a complex and multifaceted phenomenon that has long captivated the attention of philosophers and scientists alike. Whether we are discussing the value sense or the psychological sense of happiness, it is apparent that it has a significant impact on our lives and the world around us. And as we continue to wrestle with its elusive nature, we must also consider how we can cultivate a fulfilling, meaningful, and of course, happy life. So what are the two senses of happiness? What exactly does it mean to be happy? It's an issue that's perplexed philosophers for centuries. And part of the problem is that the word itself can imply different things to different people. Is it a sensation or a state of mind that we're discussing, or are we talking about something more substantive? There are two basic philosophical meanings of the word happiness. The first is a psychological one, meaning a positive emotional state. This can range from cheerful to contented to satisfied with life. The second sense is more substantive and is about leading a fulfilling and meaningful life. So what's the big deal, you may be wondering? What's the significance of this? It matters because different levels of happiness have different implications for how we live our lives. If happiness is only a fleeting emotion, perhaps we shouldn't place too much emphasis on it. However, if it's something more important, something that affects our overall well-being, perhaps we should work harder to achieve it. There are various well-being theories that relate to the substantive notion of happiness. Happiness, according to hedonists, is all about pleasure, whereas desire theorists associate it with the fulfillment of our desires. Then there are objective list theorists who argue that certain items are objectively good for us, independent of our personal thoughts or sentiments about them. These can include things like reaching our human potential or engaging in virtuous activity. Which of these theories is correct? Well, that is the matter for philosophical debate. It all relies on what you consider valuable in life and what you consider to be a decent life. Different people will have different perspectives on this, and that's fine. The definition of happiness remains a bit enigmatic. However, by examining these various definitions of the term, we can gain a better understanding of what it means to live a good life. Perhaps we should put less emphasis on chasing after fleeting emotions and more emphasis on cultivating this meaning and this fulfillment in life. So how can we clarify our inquiry about happiness? When we talk about happiness, we can mean two things: a state of mind or a wonderful existence. Philosophers and researchers have disagreed about the distinction between the two. Some individuals define happiness as a person's psychological condition, while others define it as a life that benefits the person. This ambiguity has resulted in disputes that are sometimes nothing more than semantic squabbles. The interpretation of happiness in contemporary English is contested. Is it a sense of overall well-being, or is it tied to specific events that provide pleasure? In historical literature, the well-being interpretation dominated, such as in translations of the Greek eudaimonia or the Latin beatitudo. However, even then, its translation was controversial. The well-being interpretation may have been the one that Thomas Jefferson had in mind when he referred to, quote, the pursuit of happiness, end quote. Later writers, such as Mill, may have also employed the term in that sense. Yet, given that well-being involves mental states often corresponding to pleasure, it is difficult to determine the exact sense in which the term was used. That said, when people use the term happiness, they often do so in reference to well-being. The locution happy life does not necessarily have a psychological interpretation, given that lives are not typically viewed as psychological entities. Unless otherwise specified, we'll use the term happiness to refer to a long-term psychological state in the future. It is worth noting, however, that several modern publications and works on happiness use the term to refer to a happy life. So, when discussing happiness, it's critical to specify which sense of the term we're referring to. So, is quantifying happiness even possible? Consider diving into the intricacies of happiness in search of the key to gauging it. This fascinating topic has piqued the interest of both scholars and philosophers, and while we may not have a precise hedonometer, as Edgeworth once envisioned, we can nevertheless investigate the dimensions of happiness through various approximations. When studying happiness, we don't need to focus on individual levels of happiness, but rather on identifying patterns across large groups. For example, we may observe that newlyweds are happier than widows. We must be cautious, however, because such measurements may provide correct relative happiness comparisons while failing to indicate genuine levels of happiness. Cultural biases and differing attitudes towards happiness may also have an impact on the accuracy of these comparisons. We can learn two essential lessons from these issues. To begin, self-reported measures of happiness may reliably reflect relative happiness but not always reveal how happy people are. Second, relative happiness comparisons may be misleading if the groups being compared systematically slant their self-reports in different ways. This is especially important in cross-cultural comparisons because differing happiness norms may alter the comparability of these self-reports. This discussion is predicated on the notion that people can be incorrect about their own happiness. Individuals may underestimate their happiness levels, especially when hedonistic or emotional state perspectives are included. Memories of former emotional states might be untrustworthy, and even evaluations of current sentiments can be flawed. Sincere self-reports of pleasure can be incorrect due to specific notions of happiness, such as a life satisfaction theory that equates happiness with people's inclination to view their lives as gratifying. Even life satisfaction theorists may be skeptical of this notion because life happiness may not include only explicit global judgments, but also our emotions to specific aspects of our existence. When evaluating happiness via self-report, it may be more successful to use terminology other than happiness and its cognates, such as explicit questions about life satisfaction, hedonic state, emotional state, and other elements of happiness. This approach could especially be useful in cross-cultural study, since finding appropriate translations of happiness can be difficult. Although happiness research primarily focuses on subjective well-being studies, psychological well-being research can also include eudaimonic approaches, which assess broader indicators of human needs, such as meaning, personal growth, relatedness, autonomy, and competence. The distinction between subjective and eudaimonic well-being raises crucial considerations considering the need for additional markers in well-being research beyond subjective well-being. As we continue to delve into the fascinating world of happiness, we are ever curious about the various ways it might be understood, quantified, and pursued. Are there any empirical findings relative to happiness? Empirical happiness research provides numerous noteworthy discoveries that we should examine while exploring the complexities of human contentment. First, most people appear to be content, as demonstrated by self-reported happiness, life satisfaction, and the dominance of positive effect over negative effect. According to popular scientific claims, 1, most people are happy. 2, people adapt to most changes, tending to return over time to their happiness set point. 3, people are prone to make serious mistakes in assessing and pursuing happiness. 4, material prosperity has surprisingly modest impact on happiness. This finding, however, may be challenged due to conflicting theories of happiness and the validity of self-reported life satisfaction. While initial findings raise concerns about the futility of pursuing happiness, subsequent research suggests that claims of extreme adaptation and set points may have been exaggerated. Many factors, including relationships and fulfilling work, can have a significant and long-term impact on an individual's happiness. Furthermore, cross-national differences in measured happiness are unlikely to be due solely to personality factors. These findings highlight the complex link that exists between empirical research and philosophical questions into the nature of happiness. We become better equipped to comprehend and improve human well-being as we continue to investigate these linkages. What are the sources of happiness? Subjective well-being academics have debated the relationship between material affluence and happiness. The Easterlin paradox posits that beyond a threshold where basic needs are met, wealth has little impact on happiness. In short, once an individual overcomes poverty, variations in wealth or income no longer have a significant impact on their happiness. So, basically, being filthy rich doesn't really guarantee true happiness, contrary to what pop culture might make us think. Recent studies using improved measures of life satisfaction and happiness, on the other hand, suggest a more nuanced relationship between income and happiness, with income correlating significantly with life satisfaction, but less so with happiness. The relationship between money and happiness might vary depending on the happiness theory used. Above a certain threshold, life satisfaction views may show a stronger relationship, whereas affect-based views may show a weaker one. Philosophical viewpoints on happiness are critical for understanding scientific findings and their practical implications, such as the impact of economic growth on happiness and policy. While studies tend to focus on broad trends, it is important to note that notable exceptions do exist. Despite their low material prosperity, some societies, such as certain Latin American herders, hunters and gatherers, and Amish communities, have high levels of happiness. These positive outliers show that the role of money for happiness varies among countries, and that lessons from these societies may be applicable elsewhere. Money's influence on happiness is complicated and depends on a variety of aspects, including how happiness is defined and the range of societies analyzed. Supportive relationships, engaging activities, material and physical security, a feeling of meaning and purpose, a positive perspective, and autonomy or control are also important components to happiness. Religion, good governance, trust, helping others, non-materialistic ideals, reaching goals, employment, and connection with the natural world may also be key influences. According to a global Gallup World Poll study, life satisfaction measures were more strongly related to material prosperity, while affect measures were more strongly related to psychosocial prosperity. However, the reliability of these measures may be influenced by potential errors, such as the use of a ladder scale for life evaluation, salience biases, and differences in positivity biases across income levels. Causality is another issue to consider when analyzing the link between happiness and its correlates. It's unknown if the correlates create happiness, happiness causes the correlates, other variables cause both, or a mix of the three. As you can see, it's complex. Nonetheless, the research suggests that material progress may help people achieve their goals in life, whereas relationships and engaging activities play a larger role in their emotional lives. The relationship between happiness and material success is complex, and our understanding of it is influenced by the happiness theory that we use, as well as the specific context of the individuals and civilizations under study. Researchers can better grasp the complexities of human well-being and provide ideas for increasing quality of life by taking into account the different aspects that contribute to happiness. What is the importance of happiness? Public opinion in liberal Western countries frequently supports the notion that happiness is the most significant factor influencing human well-being. Many philosophers have historically agreed with this viewpoint, usually assuming a hedonistic account of happiness. Most philosophers, however, reject mental state explanations of well-being, as well as the notion that happiness alone can suffice for well-being. Typically, objections to mental state theories of well-being center on two issues. First, non-mental aspects of our lives, such as true affection from our families or genuine successes, are thought to be vital for happiness. This notion is illustrated by Robert Nozick's influential experience machine thought experiment, which supports the idea that happiness requires pleasurable experiences that are, quote, in contact with reality, end quote. Nozick's influential experience machine thought experiment is a philosophical thought experiment that questions the value of pleasure and happiness. This is interesting. The experiment suggests that if we're given the opportunity to plug into a machine that would provide us with any experience we desired, we would choose to do so. However, Nozick argues that this would not truly make us happy or fulfilled because we would not be experiencing reality, but rather a simulated version of it. Second, objections arise when a happy individual lives a poor or stunted life as the result of adaptability, limited capacities, or narrow-mindedness. Many commentators conclude that neither happiness nor other mental state can fully account for well-being as a result of these objections. As a result, philosophical interest in happiness has waned as its theoretical significance becomes unclear if it does not play a major part in our conception of the good. Nonetheless, happiness remains an important component of a happy life, albeit not the most important one. The priority of virtue is a generally accepted ethical theory tenet that states that the demands of virtue or morality take precedence over other values in life. According to this viewpoint, when happiness necessitates bad behavior, one's happiness should be forfeited, while consequentialism, deontology, and virtue ethics all agree on the importance of virtue. They disagree on whether being good always benefits us. Despite the fact that happiness is judged insufficient for well-being and even less vital for leading a fulfilling life, well-being remains a crucial idea in ethical theory. It is one of the most important aspects of a good life, if not the only one. Despite the concerns raised above, there are practical and theoretical reasons to value happiness. In philosophical discussions of well-being and the ideal life, happiness is a contentious notion. While it's not the most important factor, it is still significant in the context of ethical thought. We can better grasp happiness's significance in human lives and its relationship to well-being and morality if we recognize its complexity and nuances. Can we restore happiness to the theory of well-being? Even if happiness does not include well-being, it may nonetheless maintain a privileged position within well-being theories. There are two ways that happiness could retain its value in these views. For starters, happiness may be an important component of well-being theories. Happiness, or related mental emotions, such as enjoyment, are sometimes included as fundamental ingredients of well-being in objective list theories. L.W. Sumner's more ambitious proposal associates well-being with genuine happiness, which is both informed and independent. The authenticity requirement is intended to solve concerns such as the experience machine and happy slave situations. Sumner's approach has the potential to strengthen happiness-centered well-being theories, and other philosophers have created variations or ideas that are closely related. However, because the approach is still in its early stages, its long-term prospects are uncertain. Second, instead of a unitary theory of well-being, one could acknowledge a family of two or more forms of prudential value, with happiness playing a prominent role in one of them. According to Shelley Kagan, welfare hedonism is right as a theory of how well a person is doing, but not how well a person's life is going. In this view, we can distinguish between narrow and broad well-being concepts. An experienced machine user may be successful in the limited sense, but not in the broad sense. Happiness may be sufficient for well-being, but only in a limited sense. Others have raised similar concerns, but these ideas have yet to acquire general adoption, probably because separating multiple concepts of prudential value complicates the already difficult task of establishing a theory of well-being. An intriguing possibility is that the phrase happy life and the associated well-being sense of happiness actually referred to a specific type of well-being, such as well-being in the broad sense or well-being taken as an ideal state. Even though happiness is not sufficient for well-being, it can nevertheless play an important part in well-being theories. We might accept the importance of happiness while resolving the numerous objections to pleasure-centered theories of well-being by treating happiness as a substantial component of well-being or as a central element within one type of prudential value. The continued investigation of these notions advances our understanding of the relationship between happiness and well-being. So, is happiness overrated? Even though happiness is not expressly included in well-being theories, it may nonetheless play an important influence. The importance of happiness for well-being is a different question from its role in well-being theories. Theories that do not emphasize happiness may yet regard it as a major component or contribution to well-being due to its relationship to the variables that comprise well-being. For example, well-being want theories frequently agree that happiness is fundamental to well-being since most individuals want to be happy. Even theories that are supposed to minimize the importance of happiness may nonetheless value it. Aristotelians associate happiness with virtuous activities, but Aristotle also believed that leading a virtuous life was extremely pleasurable. According to this viewpoint, one cannot flourish unless they are happy, and unhappiness is incompatible with well-being. Similarly, the Stoics, who prioritize a virtuous interior condition, acknowledge that happiness is important. To be unhappy is unvirtuous, and virtue, perhaps, brings to a pleasant state of tranquility. Despite the fact that both Aristotelian and Stoic theories argue that happiness does not guarantee well-being, neither denies the importance of happiness in human well-being. In fact, it's unlikely that any major philosophical school denies the relevance of happiness explicitly. Skepticism about its significance may stem from a variety of sources. Some skeptics may focus on weaker definitions of happiness, such as the idea that it is simply the emotion of feeling happy, which few hedonists or emotional state theorists would accept. Others may mistakenly believe that happiness is only concerned with positive states. However, happiness can also refer to a domain of concern that includes both positive and negative states, such as the mental states involved in being happy or unhappy. Just as healthcare focuses primarily on illness, happiness researchers may focus their efforts on studying and alleviating unhappiness, addressing conditions such as depression, suffering, and anxiety, the importance of which is obviously undeniable. Understanding frowns might be as important as understanding smiles when you're studying happiness. What are the normative issues in the pursuit of happiness? The pursuit of pleasure, a prominent literary topic, raises problems about the appropriateness of this goal and the ethical considerations surrounding various ways for reaching happiness. The issue of how happiness fits into the larger picture of having a happy life is complicated. While philosophers generally agree that in a good life, happiness comes second to morality, prudential norms also play a role. According to authentic happiness theories, attaining happiness through deception or powerful medications may not result in true well-being. This raises concerns regarding the use of drugs such as antidepressants, which may boost well-being while potentially eroding authenticity. Consider that, as our society is completely overprescribed with antidepressants. Aside from moral and prudential norms, ethical virtues may have an impact on happiness pursuit. Aristotle's list of virtues include traits such as wit and friendliness, which are not commonly regarded as moral virtues. Even if certain means of achieving happiness are morally allowed, they may be regarded unsuitable if they conflict with these ethical values. The motivation behind ostensibly virtuous behavior can also influence whether such behaviors contribute to true virtue. For example, philanthropy for the sake of personal enjoyment may not embody the virtues of compassion or kindness and may even be regarded despicable. Gratitude, another virtue frequently associated with happiness, can be problematic when it becomes utilitarian or dishonest. If appreciation is expressed only to increase one's enjoyment rather than to show real sincerity, the virtue of gratitude may be weakened or lost totally. Happiness is a multidimensional activity that includes moral, pragmatic, and ethical considerations. The suitability of various approaches for reaching happiness, as well as the importance of happiness, in living a decent life deserve critical consideration and contemplation. What mistakes do we make in the pursuit of happiness? The search of pleasure may contain traps and errors. The, quote, paradox of hedonism, end quote, holds that the pursuit of happiness is self-defeating. In other words, in order to be happy, one should not actively seek happiness. This claim, however, is arguably best read as a warning against focusing too much on personal happiness rather than a blanket rejection of the notion that happiness may be pursued. Empirical data supports the idea that putting too much attention on happiness can be harmful. Despite the fact that happiness is occasionally worth seeking, people are not always adept at finding it. Recent research has revealed various ways in which people make blunders when chasing happiness. These errors can arise in a variety of contexts, including judging present or previous pleasure levels, anticipating what would make one happy, and making reasonable decisions. In addition to these difficulties, the quest of pleasure may be complicated by the availability of multiple possibilities. According to research, having more options can sometimes contribute to lower satisfaction because the load of decision and the likelihood of regret increases. Sounds similar to modern dating apps. Furthermore, unconscious social and situational factors frequently influence human psychology and behavior, suggesting that the pursuit of happiness may be more profoundly social than previously assumed. The findings of this study have consequences for understanding human nature and autonomy, as well as the philosophical principles of a decent society and effective governance. The quest of pleasure is not an easy task, and it is fraught with possible blunders and hazards. Philosophical reflection and empirical investigation can help shed light on these issues while informing our knowledge of human nature and the foundations of a happy existence. Should governments be involved in the politics of happiness? Happiness policy was innovative a time ago. But today, many governments have included well-being measurements into national statistics. The argument for well-being policies originates from the modern liberal tradition, which emphasizes individual liberties as a primary goal of legitimate governments. However, if people consistently err in their pursuit of their interests, governments may be able to compensate for such errors through well-being promoting policies. The contextualism versus individualism debate examines whether people fare better under social structures that guide or constrain their choices, or if they fare best when their lives are controlled by themselves. Recent moral psychology research stresses the social nature of human agency, which is pertinent to this discussion. When discussing the state's promotion of happiness, moral issues arise. Paternalism is an issue. Does happiness-based policy intrude on personal liberty too much? Existing policy proposals such as libertarian paternalism advocate for moderate nudges that impose minimum costs on those who wish to make a different choice. Other moderate policies include prioritizing unemployment over economic growth and emphasizing walkable neighborhoods and green spaces in urban planning. Happiness-based policy critics believe that the emphasis should be on boosting resources or capabilities rather than happiness or well-being. Concerns about liberal neutrality, paternalism, and divergent notions about what counts for human well-being are some of the grounds for this viewpoint. However, it is unclear how much happiness policy initiatives violate personal liberty or autonomy. One key reason for viewing happiness as the incorrect policy goal is that justice requires opportunity for a good life rather than enjoyment. This reasoning, however, may not apply to all suggestions for happiness-based policy. Happiness may not be the best emphasis for a justice theory, yet it can still be a relevant policy concern. Advocates of happiness policy are particularly concerned with government's concentration on GDP and economic growth. Although this is not primarily a debate about justice, the philosophical literature has not addressed it extensively. Given the recent push for happiness-based policy, these issues are likely to receive more attention in the philosophical literature in the coming years. Given their absolute ineffectiveness in dealing with a variety of social imperatives, I personally remain skeptical of democratic government's participation in establishing what constitutes well-being or happiness. Finally, in conclusion, as we can see from our lengthy discussion, it's obvious that the concept of happiness is not as straightforward as some might have previously believed it to be. It's not a simplistic feeling that can be reduced to a single metric, such as the degree to which one experiences pleasure or contentment. Happiness incorporates a vast assortment of emotions, perspectives, and virtues. Even how to measure it has been examined, as well as the correlations that exist between it and topics such as morality, culture, and personal situations. As you think about this new information relative to happiness, I encourage you to put it to use by looking at the concept of happiness through the prism of your own unique experiences. If you keep those important life questions in mind, you never know when you might hit upon the answer that will begin to lead you to your own unique path. If you like this content and you'd like to support the channel, please consider subscribing. All right, friends, stay safe and stay healthy.